when people have me on, they expect me to make the case for essential workers. And of course I do, because everybody understands that case. Now, when Dirty Jobs went on, nobody was making that case, so I felt special, and I felt like a, iconoclast out there saying, "Hey, don't forget about this one and this one and this one." Right now, while I still hold them in the absolute highest esteem, I'm amazed at how we've taken 35 million people and deemed them unessential. That, to me, is something I reckon we're going to look back on with great linguistic embarrassment.
The main question that I think I wanted to ask you, that I think will sort of frame everything else we're going to talk about, is that there seems to be a narrative out there from a certain set of people, that it's like, oh, going back to work, it's just too risky, and no one really wants to work anyway. And AOC had some version of this sort of thing, like only in America would we value work so high. And as a guy that I have seen do the craziest jobs, where you're stepping in shit, your hands in this animal, the bats, electricity, water, you can give me 10 other examples of the crazy things that you've had people do. You work with people who do this for a living. Can you just talk about, just broadly, like the importance of work relative to finding purpose in life, relative to just setting up the rest of the things that you want out of life? Because that actually is one of the things that I'm most worried about right now, that as we sort of give away our day-to-day lives, that we're going to forget that work is important. I'm not talking about slavery, but I'm just talking about the getting up with something to do because it makes you some money so you can do everything else with your life that you want to do.
So it's the frog in the boiling water. I share your fear. It's not going to happen like a light switch, though. What's the old poem? Not with a bang, but a whimper. And the way it'll happen here is people like AOC and others who genuinely, or maybe not so genuinely, believe that work is fundamentally another expression for drudgery, are going to make those points. They're going to reduce it to something that's purely transactional. That's the first step. And if you only look at what you do as a means to make money, then then you're not an interesting person. Okay? It's just
I hear you.
It's such a one-dimensional way to look at something that should, in my view, and oftentimes does, define us. It's our work. It's the thing we choose to do with the most conscious chunk of our life. And so to reduce it to a paycheck is dumb. Obviously, there's a giant transactional element involved in it, but there's so much more. Dirty Jobs happened because because I couldn't follow in my grandfather's footsteps, which I very much wanted to do. My pop was a guy who could build a house without a blueprint. He only went to the seventh grade, but he had the chip, right, in his brain that he could take your watch apart and put it back together blindfolded. He could build a house. He could run pipe. He was a master electrician, steam fitter, pipe fitter, mechanic, architect, all of that. Well, he was heroic in his youth, in his time, for those things. Today, he'd be Mr. Cellophane. He's transparent. And so many of those trades, so many of those vocations have fallen into this gap between blue and white collar. They've lost their luster, and we're simply not properly gobsmacked the way we used to be about the miracle of modern plumbing, or the miracle that happens when you flick the switch and the light comes on. So Dirty Jobs was meant to be a tribute to my grandfather initially, and it was, and then it became a rumination on essential work, which is interesting, right? Because obviously the headlines have caught up with that. And that's really been my great good fortune over the years. I do average shows with low production value, but big themes. and I stick with those themes. And every couple of years, the headlines will catch up with them. Dirty jobs and the people we featured became weirdly relevant when the economy crashed in 2009.
Mhm.
And it's become weirdly relevant this month. I've been on every talk show there is to talk about essential work. And it's funny. I'll tell you what happens. I mean, look, there's a poster. I keep it on my wall to remind me. I put a pig on a pedestal many years ago for a lot of reasons. And when people have me on, they expect me to make the case for essential workers. And of course I do, because everybody understands that case. Now, when Dirty Jobs went on, nobody was making that case, so I felt special, and I felt like iconoclast out there saying, "Hey, don't forget about this one and this one and this one." Right now, while I still hold them in the absolute highest esteem, I'm amazed at how we've taken 35 million people and deemed them unessential. That, to me, is something I reckon we're going to look back on with great linguistic embarrassment because
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you next. So continue.
no, I'm it's your
No, but
turn.
that
I just
well, no,
realized,
no, but
what?
that was the question, really. Like once we say to 35 million people, you're not essential. It's not just about the job that they do. It's the message that's getting across to their lives, which in some ways, I actually think in some ways, if they can get through it and then rethink what they do, maybe there is something else they want to do. But I don't think that's the message that most people are going to get. I think we're going to leave people with some sort of existential crisis.
I, we're doing it. It's part of the grieving process. I was saying earlier, people are coming to terms with the fact that their vocations don't matter in the eyes of virtually everyone who has a show to host. Because in our well-intended enthusiasm to celebrate the essential workers, we've done a thing we always do with the language. And I am not a politically correct person. At least I try not to be. But language does matter a lot.
Hmm.
And, in my own foundation, when I feel most comfortably in my own lane, I talk about education and the skilled trades. And higher education is a turn of phrase that has become inculcated. And when we talk about the importance of higher education, well, who would doubt it? Of course, we need big people with big brains doing important work. But what what does higher education imply if not the existence of many forms of lower education, subordinate education? So the language bakes in a terrible kind of analysis. If you don't get a 4-year degree, if you don't buy into the idea that the most expensive path is the best path for the most people, then you wind up doing something. They don't call it lower education because that would just be crazy, but they call it alternative. We have some
Hmm.
alternatives for you, Dave. Maybe you'd like it over here in a trade school, or perhaps you'd be
Hmm.
comfortable over here in a community college, or in a fellowship, or an apprenticeship. So we did that in education, and the unintended consequences are breathtaking. We're doing it now with the very heart of people's identities, and we're doing it around this simple word. We're not meaning to do it, but you watch. It's going to come back over the net with a lot of top spin. People are already pissed off about it. I just don't think they quite understand why.
Yeah, let's actually back up for a second and talk about your foundation a little bit, because everything you're saying right now, I think, does get to a trend that I've been seeing for a while, which is I've had so many guests who come from academia, and so much of our national conversation is about outrage culture and cancel culture and what's happening at colleges. And now, because of YouTube, average people, and I mean that in the best sense of average, all of us can watch incredible thinkers give lectures. You can watch Jordan Peterson lectures on YouTube for free and maybe get more information from that than you can from a semester that you're paying 25 grand for. So talk about your foundation, and sort of, can you just relate that a little bit to what you see happening with higher ed relative to if you have a trade right now? It's like you are essential, again, in the best sense of essential. I'm not putting down the non-essential. Maybe we can come up with a better word for it right now.
Well, we should, because everything has a season. And part of the reason we're locked in this endless feedback loop of nonsense is because we're in love with cookie cutter advice. And so we dispense it with certainty. And This is what politicians do to be elected. They have to. They have to say the thing that's going to resonate with the most people. And so they wind up retrenching to bromides and platitudes and tropes. That's what safety first is.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about lifestyles instead of nonstop yelling, check out our lifestyle playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.